Listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon or morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Higher Education's Interstate Highway, On-Ramping with Interstate Passport. I'm Kate Springsteen, Member Services Coordinator for Interstate Passport. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available at www.wichi.edu/passport/webinars by tomorrow, July 26th. If you have questions throughout the webinar, type your question into the box on the GoToWebinar panel and it will be brought to the presenter's attention. Following this webinar, I will be sending out an email with information on where to find a recording of this webinar, as well as a link to a survey which we would very much appreciate if you would fill out. I'm delighted to introduce you to our presenter for today's webinar, Pat Shea. Pat is the Director of Academic Leadership Initiatives for the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, one of 4 regional compacts established by the U.S. Congress in the early 1950s. In this role, Pat provides oversight for 2 membership organizations of chief academic leaders in the region, the Western Academic Leadership Forum and the Western Alliance of Community College Academic Leaders, and their related projects. Additionally, Pat is the principal investigator for Interstate Passport, a program designed to facilitate nationwide block transfer of lower division general education based on learning outcomes at institutions participating in the Interstate Passport network. Welcome, Pat.
Thanks, Kate, and I appreciate all of you tuning in today to hear a little bit about the Interstate Passport and the opportunity to be part of higher education's new interstate highway. So today we're going to talk about a series of topics. First of all, what is the Interstate Passport? What do we know about the transfer issue in this country, and some statewide solutions to address the transfer issues? How the Interstate Passport works, who's involved in it so far, what are some of the lessons learned we've had over this period of 7 years we've been working on this project, and then how to join. So first of all, the Interstate Passport is a program that facilitates block transfer of lower division general education attainment based upon student learning outcomes. And the goal of this program is to eliminate the unnecessary repetition of learning already achieved. So I'd like to give you a little background now about how we came to be working on the development and implementation of this program. WICHE, as Kate referred to it as the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, is one of 4 regional compacts that was established by the U.S. Congress in the early 1950s, with the purpose to facilitate the sharing of information and expertise among higher education constituents in the region. The WICHE region begins with the Dakotas and moves west to include Alaska and Hawaii, as well as the U.S. Pacific territories and freely associated states. So there are 2 organizations based here at WICHE, which I direct, and Kate referred to them in reading my bio. And these organizations have members who are the chief academic officers, one for the 2-year sector and one for the 4-year sector. So in 2010, there was a meeting here of the representatives of the 2-year institutions, and they were expressing frustration about the complaints they were receiving from former students who reported that they were having to repeat courses or learning they'd already achieved when they transferred from a community college to another institution. So these academic leaders began to brainstorm about how this problem could be addressed. And in that discussion, they talked about making learning outcomes the new currency for transfer. But they said, well, this won't work unless we have our colleagues from the 4-year institutions here to help us envision how this program could actually work. And so we invited representatives from 2-year and 4-year institutions in our WICHE states to come together to talk about how this problem could be addressed. And out of that conversation came this idea for the Interstate Passport. And over a period of months, the group worked on refining that vision, and they set some guiding principles for the development of this Interstate Passport as a grassroots initiative. And I think you'll see some of those principles popping up in what we talk about today. So first of all, they talked about the necessity of making this be a faculty-driven project, that it had to be one, a model that would respect the autonomy of the institutions, and that there needed to be some quality assurance mechanisms built into the program. So we were very fortunate that we received from the Carnegie Corporation of New York funding to create a proof of concept for this new learning outcomes based transfer program. And we've gone on then to receive additional funding from the Lumina Foundation, from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and most recently, a First in the World grant from the U.S. Department of Education. So now let's talk a little bit about the U.S. Transfer population and what it looks like to ground us in how the Interstate Passport could help address some of the issues that our transfer students encounter. First of all, from a study from the National Student Clearinghouse, we know that there were about 3.6 million students who entered college for the first time in fall 2008. And the National Student Clearinghouse followed that cohort then over a period of 6 years. During that time period, 37.2% transferred. 45% of those students who transferred more than once. And so altogether then, there were 2.4 million transitions that occurred in this one cohort during that 6-year period. This slide talks about the timing of a transfer and is probably not a surprise to anyone. Most students transfer in the first 3 years, with most transfers occurring at the conclusion of a second year. What's so important then about the passport is that the second year, especially for part-time students, is a time period when most students are finishing their lower division GE. And when they transfer, it's important then that they be able to take their credits with them. And this is where we think that the Interstate Passport can have a significant impact, because for those students who are not successful in taking their credits with them, unfortunately, many simply drop out of the pipeline. In this study from Monahan and Atwell, you'll see that for community college students, they found that only 58% are able to bring all or almost all of their credits with them when they transfer to a new institution. 14% of those students lose more than 90% of their credits, and the remaining 28% lose between 10 and 89% of their credits. For those students who are low income or first generation college-going students, losing those credits can really be a showstopper, and this is why the Interstate Passport could be such an important new student success initiative. If we look at transfer patterns, many people think that transfer is primarily an issue of students transferring from a 2-year to a 4-year institution, but in this 2014 report from the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, you'll see that newly enrolled transfer students at 4-year institutions are a fairly significant part of that population. So in this study, 53% of the students at four-year institutions transferred from a two-year institution, but 47% transferred from another four-year institution. And we know now that with dropping enrollments, many institutions are increasingly interested in the transfer student population. And you'll see here that 58% of institutions indicated in the 2013 survey that they were increasingly interested in an overall recruitment strategy that would attract transfer students. So the states, many states have been working on a number of initiatives to try to address the transfer problem, to create more seamless pathways for their students as they transfer to institutions within their states. And so we're going to look at a number of these slides, and these are from the Education Commission of the states that was published in April of last year. So you see here in terms of guaranteed transfer of an associate degree that 31 states in our country now have those kinds of programs in place. For a statewide transferable core, there are 36 states that have that program in place. Another solution that many states have worked on is common course numbering. And here you'll see 16 states have developed that in their state. And another initiative is a reverse transfer, so that students who transfer to a four-year degree, a four-year institution, can still get credit for a two-year degree because their credits transfer back to the sending institution. And I understand that New Jersey's governor has just signed the legislation last week for that state to also offer this program. So Interstate Pass, all of those different initiatives are great because they help students, but they help students within their states. They don't really do that much for students who are transferring across states. So in this study, again by the Clearinghouse, you see that 18.6% of students at two-year public institutions transfer to institutions in other states. 24% of students at a four-year institution transfer to institutions in another state. And you'll see even higher percentages for students transferring out of state if they're attending a four-year nonprofit or for-profit institution. And one last study that we're going to look at here is on interstate mobility, again by the Clearinghouse, and it shows the percent of students who graduated with a credential in the 2013-14 academic year with prior credits in another state. And what's kind of interesting about this, as you can see, it varies from state to state, is in the WICHE region especially, the percent of students who are graduating with credits from a prior state is 20% or higher in 11 of the WICHE's 15 states. So those states with the darker shades of turquoise are the states where a higher percent of students are graduating with prior enrollments. Okay, let's switch gears for just a minute. I'd like to digress for just a few minutes to look at interstate travel in 1919 because I think that we can learn from some of the activities that took place in developing the highway system that we have today. That activity, which began in 1919, certainly changed the life of a young soldier and everyone listening today. And so I think you'll enjoy some of the parallels that we'll see. First of all, in 1919, Dwight Eisenhower was a 28-year-old lieutenant colonel stationed at Maryland's Camp Meade, and he had the opportunity to volunteer for what he described as, and I quote, a genuine adventure. The Army's Motor Transport Corps put together a convoy to test its capabilities to get troops and supplies to the West Coast should it be necessary to defend the western part of our country. So they, 81 vehicles and 250 enlisted men and 24 officers left a zero milestone in Washington, D.C. on July 7th, 1919, and Eisenhower wrote, "We are not sure that it could be accomplished at all. Nothing of this sort has ever been attempted." So as they traveled across the country, they had quite an experience. You'll see here in Utah, he reported that it was just one long succession of dust, ruts, pits, and holes. Rain had not fallen for 18 weeks in one stretch, and water was rationed, 1 cup for dinner and 1 at night. And still, they moved on. When they got to some of the cities that they passed through, such as this picture you'll see here in Salt Lake City, the crowds would come out, and you can imagine the conversations that occurred during that time. Some people were probably very excited about this future that an interstate highway could make for this country. They saw it as having a great impact on what our economy could be and people's ways of life. And others were pessimistic that it wouldn't be that useful and was probably a big waste of time and money. Well, the 2-mile-long caravan traveled 3,242 miles through 11 states in 62 days, averaging 52 miles an hour, or 52 miles per day, and 6 miles per hour. They arrived in San Francisco 6 days behind schedule, but they did it. The drivers, though, encountered a lot of different barriers as they made this journey, and it reminds me of the kinds of barriers that our transfer students run into today. Some of them are probably wondering if they will be able to hold on to their credits as they cross from one institution to another. Will they find themselves on the slippery slope academically, or will they be prepared to succeed? Will they find themselves underwater financially because they have to repeat courses, or it costs more than they were expecting it to cost? Will they end up getting in a situation where they're spinning their wheels? They're taking courses with learning they've already achieved at their prior institution. Or will they run into a situation where they simply have to drop out? It's taking too long, it's costing too much. Or will they have people who will help them at that new institution make that transition from their institution to the other? Well, we know that the convoy finished, and the trip that Eisenhower went on, Eisenhower went on to be the general in World War II. And he wrote that after seeing the Autobahns of modern Germany and knowing the asset that those highways were to the Germans, I decided as president to put an emphasis on this kind of road building. The old convoy that had started me thinking about good 2-lane highways, but Germany had made me see the wisdom of broader ribbons across the land. So today, our travel looks like this. It's fairly seamless. Can move easily and quickly from one place to another. And this is what the Interstate Passport is about, creating a more efficient transfer process. Well, it took several acts of Congress to get where we are today, but what is interesting is the approach. Several design parameters were set. The lanes of traffic we had to have a minimum of 2 lanes of traffic traveling in each direction. The lanes were 12 feet in width. The shoulders were 10 feet in width on the right and 4 on the left. And generally, there was a 6% grade maximum on mountainous roads. But the states determined the route within the state. They had that autonomy. They could make the decision about how they would acquire land, who would work on the project, etc. And so now let's look at the Interstate Passport, and you'll see reflected in its design some of the great opportunity to make a significant impact on the mobility of transfer students, as well as to, at the same time, respect the autonomy of the institutions. So the Interstate Passport consists of learning outcomes in 9 knowledge and skill areas. The foundational skills include oral communication, written communication, and quantitative literacy. The knowledge of concepts includes creative expression, natural sciences, human cultures, human society and the individual, and the cross-cutting skills of critical thinking and teamwork and value systems. These 9 areas were determined. They're based on the good work that the Association of American Colleges and Universities, AAC&U, did in its Liberal Education in America's Promise LEAP initiative, in which they identified the essential learning outcomes. And many institutions across our country have adopted those essential learning outcomes for their GE programs. In addition, WICHE did some research on the GE requirements in the region, and it's this combination of information upon which the 9 areas were based. So there are sets of learning outcomes in each of those 9 areas. In total, there are 65 passport learning outcomes that make up the passport. And a passport learning outcome is, of course, what a student knows and can do, and these were developed by faculty from multiple states. So let me tell you a little bit about how that happened. We were working with faculty representatives from 7 states that were involved in the grant-funded project, the early stages. They brought copies of their state sets of GE learning outcomes to a meeting here at WICHE as the basis for developing the passport learning outcomes. If the representatives were coming from a state where there was not a statewide set, they worked with faculty at institutions in their states to put together what we call a consensus set of learning outcomes that they could bring to the meeting. So each of the 9 areas had 2 representatives from each of the states. 1 representative was from the 2-year sector, and 1 was from the 4-year sector. And so these representatives came to make up what we call the interstate faculty teams. So over a period of a couple of days, each team developed an initial draft set of learning outcomes, and these drafts then went through several revisions as the representatives secured feedback from faculty on their campuses and in their states, and then discussed that with the interstate faculty team members in conference calls until they reached a consensus set in each area. So this took us about 3 years overall. Now, this consensus, this set then of passport learning outcomes, which I believe Kate has posted for you, yes, I see as one of the handouts with this webinar. is available for faculty at institutions interested in becoming a member of the Passport, Interstate Passport Network to review. And what they determine they want to join the Passport Network is that their own learning outcomes are congruent with and not in conflict with the Passport learning outcomes. So an institution does not need to adopt the Passport learning outcomes or use the same language in their own. It's to determine congruence and that they're not in conflict. And that's the basis then of this articulation agreement among the members participating in the network. Each institution then creates what we call its Passport block. This is a menu of courses and learning experiences by which a student can earn a passport for lower division general education at its institution. And the block contains all 9 areas in the Passport program. So here's an example then of the autonomy of an institution because they're making that decision. At some institutions, the Passport block is almost identical to the institution's GE program, and at other institutions it may be a subset of that GE program, or it could, in some cases, require an additional course or two. So on the screen you'll see an excerpt from the University of Arkansas's Community College at Batesville's Passport block. And you'll see, like in some areas, oral communication, there may be one course that is required, while students may have a choice of courses that they take in quantitative literacy or human cultures. Again, this is just an excerpt because there are 9 areas for which an institution identifies the courses or learning experiences by which a student will achieve the passport at their institution. You'll find examples of those passport blocks on our website if you have a chance to look at that after this presentation. So far we're seeing that the number of credits involved in passport blocks are typically 30 to 36 semester credits and 40 to 48 quarter credits. So in order for a student to earn a passport, a student must achieve a C in all the courses the student enrolls in the institution's passport block. So it's not just a grade point average of C across those courses, but actually a minimum grade of C or its equivalent. So not all students who complete a GE program at an institution will earn the passport. Those students who have some lower grades will not, but students who have a C across the courses will go on to earn it. So the early adopters and those that are awarding the passport currently are 24 institutions in 8 states, and those states include California, Oregon, Utah, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, and our first state outside the WICHE region is Arkansas, with the University of Arkansas Community College of Batesville being the first to join. In this first year of operations, the academic year 2016-17, over 20,000 passports for lower division GE were awarded, with some schools still yet to report. So you can see from the first year experience that the number of students potentially impacted by this program is very significant. So another very important component of the Interstate Passport is the tracking academic success component. And this is a process that was designed by registrars and institutional researchers. So all the learning outcomes were developed by faculty. The tracking process was developed by registrars. We're now in partnership with the National Student Clearinghouse to provide 2 services to institutions that are part of the network. The first service is called Passport Verify, and at the end of each term, registrars report student data on those students who earned a passport, just as they report students who earned a degree. Then registrars at a receiving institution where a passport student may be, or where a transfer student is an incoming student, they can ping the service to determine which of their incoming transfer students have a passport and where and when they earned it. This ensures that students with passports have their learning recognized and they don't take or repeat courses unnecessarily. The academic progress tracking tracks students for at least 2 terms after they transfer, if they're a passport or a non-passport student, as well as native students for 2 terms after earning the passport. This data is collected by the National Student Clearinghouse. It's sorted, it's aggregated, and it's sent to the sending institutions so they can see how well their former students did after transfer. And that information can then be used in continuous improvement efforts. Additionally, the National Student Clearinghouse prepares reports for the Passport Review Board so that they can see how the overall performance of the passport is working across the network and use it for making changes to improve the program. So who's involved? Well, we already talked about the blue states, which are the states that are our states who are involved in developing the passport learning outcomes, with the exception of Arkansas, which joined later. But all of these states are early adopter states. The yellow states are states where we've had some grant funding and we're working with institutions in those states to test the process of creating their passport block and looking at what would be involved to become a member of the network. And then we've been working with Montana, New Mexico, and Colorado on a pilot to map critical assignments, or sort of summative assignments, to the learning outcomes. And the process involves faculty at 6 institutions, a 2-year and a 4-year in each of those states. And the faculty score their own assignments, and then faculty at the 5 other institutions score the assignments. And then that round of scoring is repeated by looking at some of the student artifacts. And the idea behind this is that it's an opportunity to look at how faculty are addressing the learning outcomes and to possibly identify some best practices in that, and also whether a tool like this might be useful to other institutions that are members of the network on a voluntary basis. It would always be on a voluntary basis if we were to decide to offer it. So the scoring process has been completed. NCHIMS is analyzing some of the data now and will be preparing a report and recommendations over the next few months. So stay tuned on the outcome of our pilot on mapping the learning outcomes to assignments. So there are a lot of benefits for students for earning a passport. One of the one of the things that we think will happen is that there will be a better understanding about what GE is by making it clear that this transfer is based on learning outcomes, because many times students say that they don't understand what GE is, they don't understand why they have to take those courses, they don't understand what it is they're supposed to be getting out of it, and sometimes hear the same thing from parents. Students will know in advance that when they transfer that their GE requirements will be met, and so they won't have to worry about that repeating courses unnecessarily. And sometimes students transfer and it can take several months or even more than a year to find out what the status of their prior credits will be towards their path to graduation. So this will really help them, we think. And if students don't have to repeat courses, it will save them time and money, and ultimately they would graduate sooner. For institutions, there is the benefit of this simplified transfer process. So for academic advisors and registrars, when a passport student transfers in, they will know that they've met the GE requirements in the passport's 9 areas. One of the important benefits for faculty, I think, is that they will have, could have possibly some more curricular flexibility. So if they want to make changes in the curriculum in a course in the passport block, as long as they're still addressing the learning outcomes, this does not trigger any kind of articulation review, which our current articulation, course-by-course articulation process sometimes does. They can even delete courses from the passport block or add courses to the passport block that when they determine that it's appropriate to do so. Another great advantage is getting these academic progress reports. So often institutions don't know how well their students do after transfer, and so getting that information back will help them make improvements. If they find, for example, that their students are succeeding at all of the institutions they transfer to except for one, that would be an opportunity to have a conversation with that other institution and find out where they could make that pathway smoother for their students. And then, of course, if students are more successful, if they're retaining and then they're earning their credential, then that increased retention and increased graduation rates helps with the metrics of an institution. So in summary, some of the lessons learned over this 7 years, we've learned that there are a lot of institutions that are in the midst of GE reform, or they've just finished GE reform, and so there are different points at which institutions will engage with the Interstate Passport. For some, they want to finish the GE reform effort that they have underway, while others say, no, we want to do it simultaneously. And a lot of it really depends on how much work has gone on with learning outcomes prior to institutions getting involved with the Interstate Passport. I mentioned earlier that not all students who complete GE on their campus will earn a passport, and that's because at some institutions, students can transfer with grades lower than C in their GE courses, and then proceed. We've learned that state-level entities can be really helpful in coordinating and facilitating institutions learning about the passport and working maybe on a statewide passport block together. But at the basis of that work is the faculty work, and that's really at the core of the success. And so the states and systems we've worked with so far that brought faculty in early and worked with them through the learning outcomes phase of the project have good stories to tell. So there are several different components, and we've talked about a few of these in the passport. You know, it's looking at the congruence of the learning outcomes, developing the passport block, identifying ways to record the passport on the transcript and report data to the National Student Clearinghouse, working with academic advisors so that they understand how to advise students about the passport, and then also with campus marketing staff so that they get the word out to students. All of those steps are required in being successful, I think, in the Interstate Passport. But at the very beginning is the work with faculty, and that is absolutely critical, and that's where the work begins. And it can take different amounts of time, again, depending upon the amount of work that institutions have done previously on learning outcomes. And we've learned that the ideal leaders are those that have an open mind, and they're always looking for new ways to improve student success and can think about articulation in a different way rather than course by course, but by looking at it in terms of learning outcomes as that basis of transfer or the new currency for transfer. So the steps to joining, first of all, it's to build that awareness among the different communities on the campus or in the system about what the Interstate Passport is and what our goals are in putting this program, making this program available. And we have lots of resources on the website, and we're also available to make presentations if that would be helpful. Second step is to work with faculty to determine what that congruence is with the passport learning outcomes and the institutions or the state's own existing learning outcomes. Then to construct a passport block, and then prepare to participate in the academic progress tracking services that are available through the National Student Clearinghouse. And then institutions simply apply online and sign an MOU. And a copy of that MOU is on our website if you want to see what the terms of that agreement are. And right now is a great time to join. We have a promotion. The first 100 institutions receive an opportunity to join with 5 years of free participation. So in summary, we hope that you will consider being a visionary and join in this effort or encourage others in your state or institution to take a stronger look at this program. It is, as far as we know, the only nationwide network of 2-year and 4-year nonprofit colleges and universities dedicated to block transfer of general education attainment based on a multi-state faculty developed set of learning outcomes, the 65 learning outcomes that we talked about previously. And through the Interstate Passport Network, we provide a seamless, efficient, and economical transfer process for students, and making that process very predictable for them before they transfer. Whoops, I didn't change the slide. And then we track the academic progress of those students to help inform the continuous improvement efforts, not only at the institution, but also for the program in general. And then as a result, member institutions have a pool of well-prepared transfer students which they can recruit, and that leads to increased rates of retention and completion for students. So now, Kate, I think we've come to the conclusion of today's webinar, and I'm hoping that there might be a few questions from this group.
So just to remind everyone, if you would like to ask a question, there's a section on your GoToWebinar panel where you can type in a question. And we'll just give everybody a couple moments to get any questions in there.
So, Kate, one question that we commonly get about forming the passport block from institutions is they're not sure about teamwork, where in their curriculum they address teamwork. And so we're finding that institutions are finding that they do address it. And it's frequently, it might be in music courses, or it could be in theater, or it could be in science lab courses. So it's in a variety of places across the curriculum. And one of the resources that we have listed on our website, it's actually, I think, embedded in an FAQ about the question about teamwork, comes from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which has some great resources for colleges and universities that are including teamwork in their curriculum. So I thought I would just add that while we're waiting for a couple of questions.
Yeah. We do have a question about the cost for institutions. What is the annual cost for institutions past the free period?
That's a great question, which and the answer to that is on our website.
It's based on FTE students, and it's for institutions with up to 2,499 students, it's $2,500 per year. Institutions between 2,500 and 9,999, it's $5,000 per year. And institutions with over 10,000 students, it's $7,500 per year.
Oh, great! Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
So the way those costs were set was looking at the benefits of participating by our business consulting team. They looked at what it costs typically to recruit one new student at some of these different institutions, and determined that the passport, we think, will help retain students, and that these fees will be equivalent to retaining one student at many of those different levels. Any other questions?
Well, there aren't any more questions in here right now.
Okay. Well, my email address is on the screen, and along with my phone number. So if anyone has questions, feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to get back in touch with you. And thanks so much for tuning in today.
Thanks, Pat.